Hello and welcome everyone. Today we're going to start working on something different that we haven't done before. It's funny, I've done over 20 workshops with you now, and this is the first time we're going to focus on the sky. There is a way that we can do this so that light is still our main focus, and that is what we're going to do today. Now you can use the reference image that I gave you, or you can use your own reference image to get an image similar to the one that you have from me, where the sky is really huge and you can see it sort of going off into the distance as a vanishing point. You would need to be somewhere where you're elevated higher up so that you can see a far distance. And in this case, this is on top of the escarpment in Hamilton, Ontario, not far from where my studio here is actually. And it's a beautiful view, just the way the road goes. The road does dip down a little bit towards the escarpment, but there's one point where you're at the highest and you can see clear across almost to Toronto on a good day. So it's quite a nice panoramic view. So if you want to use your own image, you can definitely do that. The ideas that we do here are going to be the same. So you can still follow along and use your own image. The other thing I recommend is when you're using your own image, don't do any touching up to it. Don't change the color. Don't use filters or anything like that. You want to have a true to life image as possible to use. And the only reason we're using images is because we're not outside. The best way to learn how to paint or draw is drawing from life. So if you can get outside or set up a still life in your home, or a pet is sleeping and you want to do a picture of them, that's always the very best. That's where you're going to learn the most, is when you're using real life as your subject matter rather than the pictures. Because digital pictures, as we've talked about before, digital cameras are great, but they make everything in focus. This image that you have from me, you'll be able to see far, far away in the distance. There are some hydro lines, and they're as clear as day in this picture. But if you were looking at that with your human eyes, you wouldn't be able to see it as clear. So that's the disadvantage of using photographs. So we're going to start. Actually, I want to do a little different than I usually start. I'm going to start with the center area, and I've already drawn this in. I don't know if you can see it too well through the camera. A little bit. So what I've done is I've put in the ending line here. This is where I want my foreground to be, and then everything else above this is going to be sky, because our sky is our star in this particular image. And across here, off in the distance, is the escarpment edge, actually on the other side of Burlington. So we're going to put that in, and in your reference image, it's fairly greenish bluish. I'm actually going to change that color. You can keep it to the green blue if you want. I'm going to mix up a very light pinkish orange. Very light. You may not even notice the difference between the color of my canvas here and the color that I'm putting on. And the reason why I'm doing this is because we're doing this all in one sitting. At least I am. Everything is going to be wet as I'm working. And the sky obviously has a lot of blue in it. And then the grass that I want to put in front has a lot of yellow. So I could have the blue and yellow mix in this area here and give me that natural green. Or I could put in this is what I want to do, which is going to give me a little bit of contrast in that area. It'll be something different to look at. The nice thing is, if I decide along the way that I don't like this, I can go back in and I can fix it and change it, and take it out, and do it again. So I've added a little bit more red to make it a little darker so that you can see on your screen what I'm doing. This is my area off in the distance. So now I want to do that grass. And I just want to put in some dark areas, some light areas. If you've been following along these videos that I've been doing over the last year and a half, you'll notice that things have changed from the very first videos that I put up to what I'm doing now. And that's very normal. When you start making art on a regular basis, you will discover that your art is going to change over time. And that's a good thing. And don't fight that, because what that means is that you're starting to develop your own style and your own way of doing things. And that's a good thing. So don't resist that change. Don't try to keep things the same. I like to change up what I do on a regular basis. Purposely, I will, if I've been using a particular process to start and finish a painting, I'll change it up so that I don't get stagnant with what I'm doing. I don't get bored. And then the work remains exciting. So, I mean, I have a reference image today, but I'm not going to follow it to the letter. The reference image, and this is why I call it a reference image, is because it's something that you refer to as you're painting. So if you start to get lost with your own vision and your own mind and your own soul, what you believe that you want this to work out to be, then you take a look at your reference image. So it's sort of a grounding that can bring you back to your original idea. And in this case, as you've noticed, I gave you two images. One image is the grass, which I'm putting in here now. And your other image is the sky. Now the reason why this happened is because I liked both. I liked the way the grass looked in this particular image, but the sky, I mean, it's okay. You could use this image for your entire painting if you want, in which case you would want to change your direction of your canvas. Although you don't have to, you could keep it this way and then just do a section of what you're seeing over here. And then the sky one I really liked because it showed a lot of depth. I took quite a few that day. The sky was really nice, had some really nice textures going on. So I took a few, and the one that I selected I feel works best for this particular picture that we're doing today. So don't be afraid when you're when you're choosing photos for your work, to use several photos as your references, and that's pretty common too. A lot of artists will do that, and that also guarantees that the work that we're doing is 100% original. We're not just copying a photo per se. Now it's different than when I'm doing a commission, which I actually just finished one this morning. This is my last little add-ons to it. When I'm doing a commission, depending on what the people are requesting, I keep pretty close to the original image. They did give me complete license, artistic license on this one that I did for them. They said, you know, you can change up the colors, whatever works. However you need to make it work for a nice painting. The image they gave me was quite good actually, so didn't have to change too much. But when you're working with several photos, it's actually quite cool because you can select what part of the photo you want to use. So I'm just adding in, I'm using a mixture of my lemon yellow and my cadmium yellow to do the grass. And I've left space in between. I haven't done it completely solid, as you see. And now I'm going in, I'm just putting in a few dark areas that I want to have. When you're doing grasses are great because they use a wonderful compositional tool, which is repetition. And having repetition or a rhythm in your painting helps to move the eye along the painting. So it's a really nice tool that is quite often used by artists in their work. So filling in some of the dark areas, and this is just a layering process, especially if you're using the oil paint. You'll find the layers that are underneath, the layers that you put over top, some of it's going to show through and you allow that to show through, and then other sections will cover completely. So you really want to just play. Don't be too worried about perfection. Unless your goal is to have a painting that is like a photo, it's photorealism. If that's your goal, then you're going to approach this differently. For me, that's not my goal in this one. My goal in this one is to show that beautiful feeling of the swaying grass and the wonderful sky. So I mixed up a little bit of a sort of a pinky orange now that I'm going to put through here. And if you look closely at your reference image, although overall it appears yellow, there are a lot of different shades happening in those grass. Sorry, I guess I'm having trouble talking right now. I haven't painted and talked like this for a little while, so it does take practice. Because one part of your brain is controlling the brush, and the other part is trying to control your mouth and the words that are coming out. Sometimes it doesn't always work. So as you can see, I'm not being like very careful about every brush stroke, I want it to be very random and very loose, because when you look at grass swaying in the breeze, the grass doesn't decide that they're all going to uniformly go like this. It all depends on what neighbor this stalk of grass is up against. Maybe it's going to hit another piece here that's beside another piece. So even though there's repetition going on, there is a lot of variation within that as well. So I want to keep it nice and loose. To kind of show that variation of the grass. I also want to have it come up a little bit more to this area back here. Some of these stalks I'm going to pull up over top of my sky, but I don't have the sky in there yet, so I'll do that once the sky is in. I'll go back in and grab some of the paint. The paint will still be wet, and pull that through. I've mentioned this before, artists will often talk about pushing and pulling paint, and it's not something that you would understand unless you're actually painting yourself, and especially if you're doing oil, because oil, even though it's here, I can come in here now even with my finger or a brush and start moving things around. So I can push this over here, and you can see how that completely dragged the paint, and that's because the paint stays wet. So there is a pushing and pulling that happens. I might tone down these reds later. That all depends on the sky and determining what else I need to do in here. It's going to need more dark as well. Fairly monochromatic. It's pretty much all the same value right now. And value basically describes the lightness or the darkness of an area. It doesn't describe the color or the temperature. The temperature, again, is another consideration that you'll make as you start to paint more often and you get more knowledgeable. And the only way to get knowledgeable, you can read a million books and watch a million YouTube videos and watch all my videos and try them out, but the only way you're going to really learn how to paint is just to paint. That's the best way. It's like for anything, really. Best way to learn anything is to just get in there and do it. Because you learn by doing. As you go along, you learn what's working, you learn what doesn't work, you learn how to use the tools. A lot of beginning painters, they'll use their tool very close to the top of the brush, which doesn't give you, as you can see, you can only move it in this direction. As you mature as a painter, you'll learn that holding a brush out here gives you far more freedom, because now I can use my entire wrist and forearm to move the brush around. So we're gonna go to our sky. So I just want to show you very quickly, I've started buying some new brushes. These are a different brand than what I've been using for the past year. These are actually, there's two different brands here. There's a Princeton and a Silver Cambridge are the two green handled ones. And I really like these simply because the length of the bristles is much longer than these brushes here that I've been using. These ones are really super short. And not so much for these little canvases, but for the larger canvases, it makes a huge difference because you've got this entire area you can cover a whole lot more. These brushes, the bristles tend to grab onto more paint, so you can work with more paint. And I'm going to put in the white areas first, just so I don't forget where they are. So I've got a big chunk of white. I'm going to move it over here into my blues. And for the most part, this is just a pure white that I'm using, which I don't use very often. But I just want to lay in a little bit of where these clouds are. Before I accidentally cover them over, and I'm not going to make it a solid. I'm still going to leave spots showing through because there's going to be little blue spots showing through. So I'm keeping it very loose and airy and sketchy. I don't want the edges to be sharp edges. As you know, as we all know from our experience in looking at clouds, clouds don't have a sharp edge. But be careful when you're in the corner. You don't want your line coming directly from that corner all the way down. Just divides up your canvas awkwardly when you do that. So you want to have it off to one edge of the corner. And this doesn't look like a whole lot right now, and that's okay. It's not meant to look like anything in particular at this moment. Basically, we're putting in some shapes, determining the overall direction of where these clouds will be. And I am using a fairly thick application of the paint. Got a fair bit, as you can see here, fair bit on my brush. Just periodically I'll step away and check to make sure that my camera's still running. I've had it happen before where I've started filming one of these and then the camera will stop and I'm still chatting away and painting, and then I look and the camera's not on, and yeah, a little frustrating. These things happen when you're doing stuff like this and you're depending on technology to help you with it. There's a few in here. So everything is basically, I've selected a point approximately in this area where I want everything to diverge to. And I did do an initial sketch just of the large shapes onto the canvas, and I know we didn't talk about that. For any of you who are beginners tuning in, you can go back, because this is a pre-recorded, you can stop, go back and draw in your large shapes. Basically what you see that I have here are the large shapes. This is all that I put in. It was basically that in the distance line of the escarpment, which is sort of it's kind of a mountain in a way. And then the sky shapes, the cloud shapes, and then our big grassy area. So I think that's good for the white. I'm going to, let's see, I've got ultramarine and I also have some cobalt. And I'm actually going to use both. I'm going to mix them together about half and half. Now the ultramarine does have more of a purpley hue to it. So I'm going to give it a try. It may not be what I'm looking for, but I feel that this area up here, if you look at our reference image, does have that very slight kind of purplish hue to it. So we're going to give it a try. And I do have white on this brush. I'm using the same brush, and that's fine. And I didn't really want it to be a super dark blue, so the white is going to blend in with that. And I paint, as you can see what I'm doing right now, I tend to like to paint my edges as I go. This is a 12 by 16, and it's a stretched canvas. As you can see, it's I purchased it like this. It's some professional artists like to stretch their own canvas. I personally, I don't have the patience for that kind of thing. I don't have the tools, which is major, because you would have to purchase a lot of extra tools, which I don't have. I don't have the budget for either. So for me, I would rather get canvas that is already ready to go. That's just my personal preference. And I do shop around to try and get the best deal that I can, so I'm not spending huge amounts of money on my canvases. Although I do prefer, as I showed you this one here, see how it has the canvas itself is kind of tucked in, all nice and neat, rather than one that is stapled like this. Now there's nothing wrong with these. I have lots of paintings that are like this, but this, as you can see, is it's not as clean looking on the back. So if you're doing something for a customer, it's a special commission, I always recommend spending a little bit extra and getting the canvas that has a nice finished back, the way this one does. On my tablet screen, I have my reference image on, and occasionally it decides it wants to go to sleep on me, so I have to go in there and make sure it's staying awake. Now again, I'm just laying this down very, very rough, because I'm going to go in later with a soft brush and soften up some of these edges. And as you can see, we've got the blue is starting off quite dark from the top, and it's getting lighter and lighter as we head down further into the painting. In general, when you're especially on a sunny day, that's pretty much how the sky is going to appear. It's going to look darker up top and lighter down below, in general. Sometimes you'll have a dark cloud off in the distance, right on the horizon area. Or you'll see there's a storm coming, and so it's going to be darker off in the distance down there as well. So those kinds of things will make it look different. But in general, this is what we've got. And the thing is, if you want to show depth, the way we want this to show things going far off into the distance, the best way to do this is to have your sky lighter off in the distance. Now I know there's students that do these workshops and they use acrylic paint, and you might be one of those. And that's perfectly fine. Some of the techniques that we use here are certainly transferable to using acrylic. I've tried acrylic. It's not a kind of paint that I enjoy using. I enjoy using oil paint. And that's just a personal preference. It's something that when you get out there and you start trying new mediums and new paints and different kinds of brushes and different kinds of canvas and all that sort of thing, you'll start to have your own preferences. And chances are they're not going to be the same as what I like, because we're all different. And so the choices that you make with your materials, your artist materials, there's no right or wrong. It's what works for you and what you feel most confident with. For me, when I'm using oil, I feel very confident. And it's a lot of fun. I really enjoy using oil paint. If you haven't tried it, I would encourage you to give it a try. It's really not any more expensive than acrylics, because I can go with a small tube like this. I'm pretty sure I bought this cadmium yellow tube, oh gosh, at least a year ago, probably more than a year ago. And it's just getting to the end now, and I do about 70 to 100 paintings a year on average. So they do last a long time. And a tube like that, I believe, was around $15 to $20. And I use walnut oil paint. Again, that's my personal preference. I used to use the linseed oil paint, and the one day I went to get supplies, and the store didn't have the color that I wanted in the brand I usually get, which is with linseed oil. They had it with the walnut oil, and it was by M. Graham, which is a paint manufacturer. So I bought it and I tried it, and I thought, wow, this paint is really cool, because it was really super shiny. It was soft. It had a very low odor to it. So then from there, I just ended up starting to buy the walnut oil based paints. And over time, most of the tubes of paint that I have now are the walnut oil. I have some linseed oil paint tubes left that I still use. And I will say, because of walnut oil, the texture I find is very soft, which is wonderful. However, when I'm mixing this blue with the white and I use the two, I find it almost too soft. So what I've been doing is I'm buying the Winton brand, which is a linseed oil base, for my white. And this particular brand, you can get, some of the art stores do have the double pack, which is a lot cheaper to purchase. So I'll buy the double pack, and that'll last me quite a while. So if you're wondering, can I mix this brand with that brand? Yes, you can. I've been doing it for years. Lots of other artists do this as well. You don't have any issues doing that. can mix different brands. So we're just kind of filling this in here, very rough. By no means do I consider myself an expert. I think that term is kind of awkward, really. Who is an expert anyways? Is there really a time when you can know everything there is to know? So I've got a fairly dark area here, and I want to have some of that coming across. So just want to darken this down a little bit. So now these areas in here that I left open are actually the shadow that you see underneath a cloud. So I'm going to use a little bit of my umber, my raw umber, mixed in with my blue. Some of the white is already on the canvas, and what this is going to do is it'll give me that shade that I'm looking for. This that's underneath the cloud. Now I use a raw umber, and I've talked about this before. I use the raw umber as opposed to a burnt sienna or a burnt umber, because anything that indicates burnt usually has a little bit of a red hue to it. You don't want that. I like to have the raw umber because it's a neutral. And I can use it also as a gray. And that's basically what it does, is it grays down your colors. As you can see, I've added it to the blue, and this area is definitely, it doesn't have the brilliance of over here. It has more of a gray feel to it. And that's what I want. You can use reusable, this is just an old towel that I've cut up to use as a rag, or if you prefer, you can use paper towel. But I want a dry brush with nothing on it. I want to make sure it's nice and dry. I want to have a dry cloth, and I'm going to start and this is just to soften these edges. And I'm just going really softly here. Takes a little bit of practice. I'm just blending some of these edges where the cloud and the sky are meeting. Now, if you're using acrylic, you definitely want to do this while your paint is still wet. Which means you're going to have to work a little more quickly than what I'm doing here. If you're using oil, you have the luxury of taking your time. And I always encourage you to stand back at each section because it's hard to see things coming together when you're this close to your work. So stand back, and I'm going to do that now. And take a look. And that's when you can see things coming together. So I like how this is working out. I'm going to keep going with it. And I'm varying, as you can see, I'm varying how I use the brush on the canvas. Sometimes I'm pushing the white into the blue, and other times I'm pushing the blue into the white. And I'm varying the pressure. Sometimes, like right now, I'm using a fair bit of pressure, and then other times just very lightly. And as you saw, when I wanted to do it lightly, I hold the brush further back, and that forces me to give it a very light touch on the canvas. I don't know if I like this here. I'm just going to soften it out and see what happens with it. Having these lighter areas in the cloud and darker areas in the cloud gives it some form rather than having just a flat white area. Clouds are not solid objects. And if you're outside trying to paint a cloud, you need to paint really fast because they move and change very, very quickly, especially on a day where there's a lot of activity going on up in the atmosphere, and you can see them moving and changing right before your eyes. Often if I'm painting outdoors, the sky is one of the first things I'll put in if I like the way it looks at the second that I sit down to do the artwork. Otherwise I'll leave it later on for when I think that the sky is looking the way I want it to look. Sometimes if things aren't working the way you want, just wait. Wait and see what's coming up next. I want to blend this here. There we go. Through. And this is, when you start doing this, this is when you'll discover what I really mean by pushing and pulling paint. You don't want to overdo it. Once you've got an area and it's fairly decently in the manner that you want it to go, then just leave it alone. Especially when you're using oil paint, it's so easy to overwork. It's the little imperfections that actually give the work more interest. I actually, when I paint, I like to have my brush strokes showing. Kind of losing this white area that I had here. That's okay, I can go back in if I decide I want to brighten it up. I can add some paint in there. So I'm going up and down with my brush. To get those wispy edges out This particular cloud here really has a very soft edge. And I'm also okay, I've got that pink in the background. And I know some of you may have done that and some of you may have not done that. I'm okay with some of that showing. It used to be a concern of mine when I first started painting. I thought I had to cover every single inch of the canvas, and the canvas can't show through in any spots, and that's so important, yada yada yada. And then I went to the McMichael Gallery, and I went to take a look at their exhibit of the Group of Seven. And it's interesting, in the Group of Seven area, they have not only full, huge paintings that they did, but they also had smaller paintings. Some of them were sketches that were done outdoors. What they call to me and you, it would still be a painting, but a sketch just indicates that it was an impression of what was in front of them, rather than spending lots and lots of time working on details and that kind of thing. They just get an impression of the scene, and then they go back to their studio later and either finish off that painting, or they use that painting as a reference to start a larger painting. And what I discovered in close examination of their paintings, both in the completed ones and in the ones they've done plein air, is that you could clearly see in many places the canvas showing through. Here it was, a painting, a valuable painting by world-renowned artists, and the canvas was showing through. So that was a bit of a revelation to me, because at that point I realized that, you know what, it's okay if the canvas shows through, because it didn't take away from the painting whatsoever. So these days, when I paint, I'm okay with the canvas showing through, and actually in some points I want the canvas to show through. And in this particular one, because we've got a very pinkish, orangish, almost a yellow going on here, I want some pink coming through in the sky, because that will show a bit of a continuity of our palette, because we're going to have some pinks coming through in the sky. So that's okay. I'm okay with that. This edge here that I'm working on right now is actually the edge where we see the most sun. The sunlight is reflecting quite brilliantly off that area. We're going to go back in and put that highlight in. I know it's hard to see in the camera, but this area here is quite translucent. There's quite a bit of the pink coming through that background, which is absolutely what I'm looking for. Just want to do a little bit of a harder edge in sections here. And all I'm doing is basically I'm using what's already on the canvas. There's already quite a bit of blue here. Just going back in, even though we softened a fair bit of this, going back in and just creating a few hard edges. Down here, I want to make that a hard edge. That, grab my blue brush. Put some more blue in here. And the reason is because this area here, as I said, is going to be where our sunlight hits. It's going to be our focal point. So that area needs to have a harder edge and more contrast. So I need a darker area contrasting with the lightest area. Just some of that darker blue. I still want to get it a little darker right in the edge. As much of that paint that's on here as I can. Here too, I just want a smaller area just to counterbalance so not everything is in the one side. And I think I'm going to create another area up here. Same idea. Got a bit of a hard edge there. I'm going to actually make it a little darker, and that will bring it out more. So I've got a combination. I've got soft edge here where the cloud is wispy. I've got a harder edge here, and we've got that harder contrast between the dark and the light, and a little bit here and a little bit here. So we've got a nice repetition going on that's kind of leading us down. And then I want to do a little bit of a cloud. Here. The cloud was already there. All I did was add in the shadow underneath. This one here, I'm going to darken a little bit, not too much. And then I'm going to reciprocate on the other side here. So we kind of, we had this in here and then we sort of lost it when we started to smooth things out. And at this point, there's really no right or wrong. It's just a matter of playing around and trying to work on getting some kind of form with these clouds. You don't want them to be flat. So in order to give them a shape or a substance, It's basically just manipulating your light areas and your dark areas. You have a lot of light areas in here, so use what you have and then just add some dark. Now really, I could play with this probably for another hour. I don't want to do that to you. Add a little tiny little bit more in here. Kind of breaks that one up a little. There, I kind of like that. I think we'll go with that. I want to use some yellow. This area back here, I want to make it a little brighter, a little lighter. Finding it a little too dark. I basically mixed in some white, a little bit of my lemon yellow, and applying that over top of the pinky orange that we have here, just to lighten it. I really want it to disappear further in the background. And then I'm going to mix some yellow with some white. Get a very nice light lemon yellow. This is tricky because you don't actually want to blend it into what's there or it's going to turn green. So I'm really just very lightly putting it on. And it's going on top of what's there. And these are just the highlight areas where the sun is really reflecting off of the clouds. Okay, I think I'm good with that. So now we're going to go back and we're going to finish our grass. I'm basically using the same lemon yellow that we just used. It's Azo yellow mixed with some white. And I'm using, it's a flat brush, it's number 4, so it's fairly small, but it has a flat edge, which allows me to draw a line fairly easily. I don't want the line to be a solid line all the way up, because when you look at the grass, an entire stalk of grass is not all one shade. It all depends on where the light is hitting it. We've got a bunch of grass together. There's areas, the same with tree branches, there's areas that overlap that are going to cover up that area where the sun can't reach. And so there's going to be areas of shadow and areas where the sun gets into it of light. For the most part, most of your lightest areas are going to be towards the top. The sun doesn't get down to the bottom very often. You'll have little bits of sun reaching down here in spaces and areas, but overall most of the lighter area is going to be up top here. Which makes perfect sense. It's just the sun on this planet is above us. So. Making art, especially if you're Subject matter is nature. It's all about observing nature and observing how nature behaves in different situations. See, at this point, I remember I talked about earlier, I didn't want to go too far up because I wanted to put my sky in. So we've got the sky in, so now I'm going up past that line and letting some of the grass go above into the sky. And that will also help with depth because it will show that this is much more forward and that everything converges into the background. It's going to give us that nice effect that we were looking for. Creating art is basically all decision making. Everything that you're doing as you're painting is a decision. Every brush stroke is a decision. You made a decision to hold your brush in a particular way and to have it go across the canvas in a certain way, and the color that you're using. They're all decisions. So creating art is really great exercise for your brain. I want to add a little bit more. We've got some orange. So let's try, I haven't used too much of my cadmium yellow. Let's try some of that. I want to get other golden hues coming in here. The cadmium yellow is more of a mustard yellow as far as the temperature, the color itself. Temperature wise, it would be more of a warm yellow, where I find the azo yellow is more of a cool yellow. So definitely what we need in the grass now, we've got a lot of light areas, is to complement our light areas with some shadows. And I'm going to use an even smaller brush now. I've got a number 2. It's a flat brush. And I'm going to use a mixture of our blue with our brown, our raw umber. So as I mentioned before, the sun is above, so most of the light areas are going to be on the tops of the grasses, and then the darker areas, of course, are going to be down below, most of them, where the sun has more trouble getting through. And this is really, there's no right or wrong at this point. You're just kind of playing around. You're looking at the grass that you've got in here, and you're determining where you want things to stand out a little more. Because where you put this contrast, this heavy dark area up against light areas, is where you're going to have a really high areas of contrast. And that attracts the viewer's eye and attention. I know on your screen, this, what I'm putting in here, probably looks like it's black, but it's not. It's the blue mixed in with the brown. I haven't used actual black paint. Oh, I think 3 years now. 2 or 3 years since I've used black, and I still have a couple tubes. I just at one point decided I wasn't going to use black anymore, because black is not a color that's found in nature. Shadows are not black. Shadows are darker values of the object, which is a tricky concept to understand. But once you get it, it's pretty easy to then use in your work. Stand back and take a look. I'm going to extend some of these. And I'm going to put, there's like a feather, I call it a feather head on the grasses. I have 2 cats that I share my home with. And a couple times during the recording of this, they've come upstairs. They like to bring gifts. Basically, they'll find their toys and bring me a toy. And then I say thank you, and they're all happy, and we go on our way. Okay, so I said we're going to do some feather heads. And the ones in the picture are sort of a golden, yellowy, orangey kind of color. So I'm going to mix up something like that. I don't want it too different than what's already there, so it's kind of an orange. And I'm putting little blobs on. And then I'm going to go back in with a dry brush and pull that blob across to form the feathers. I'm using fairly heavy, I know it's really hard to see, but it's quite thick. And then I'm going to add some dark ink behind that, just a little bit, and you'll see why in a minute. I've said before, if you have brushes that kind of got all splayed on the ends like that, don't throw them out, because they're great for doing these texturing techniques, like what we're going to do right now. So what I actually want to do is I want to open up these bristles even more. And I need to make sure it's nice and clean and dry. I'm actually going to get another towel, fresh towel, because this way I know I'm not going to transfer any paint anywhere. And then we're just going to go to where we laid those paint strokes down that were super thick. And basically, we're just smearing it across. And the reason I put the dark in with the light, as you can see, so then you've got the contrast of the dark and the light working together to give it those little feather heads. So there we go. That is our sky painting. Going to give you a nice close-up view of what we have here. Here's our feather heads. As you can see, the paint's been pulled across. We've got our nice textures down here. They're contrasting. And then in the sky, We've got our highlights, and you can see how thick that paint is laying on top and over here as well. Thanks so much for joining me today. I hope you had a lot of fun creating your masterpiece. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to either send me a message on Facebook or to send me an email. And I hope to see you again. Thanks so much, and bye for now.